In a muddy delivery area, workers manually unload large granite slabs from a flatbed truck. As one slab is slid free, the balance of the remaining stack changes. Never ever unstrap or move a vertical slab without securing the remaining stack. In a transport yard, a worker stands near a parked truck while a forklift operates nearby carrying a stacked load of tires. The load initially appears stable, but conditions change instantly. Stacked round materials such as tires, pipes, or drums must never be transported on standard forklift forks unless they are physically restrained. These shapes lack inherent stability and can move freely if not secured. Without proper banding, shrink wrapping, or purpose-built attachments such as tire clamps, even small movements, speed changes, or mast adjustments can result in load displacement. Ground personnel must remain outside the potential movement area where materials could move if stability is compromised. On the rear deck of a transport vehicle, a worker organizes equipment while a concrete utility pole is lifted overhead. During hoisting, the load becomes unstable. Never remain on a vehicle while a load is being lifted within its operating envelope. Rigging components such as slings, chains, and hooks are subject to wear, environmental exposure, and cumulative loading that may not be visually apparent during routine handling. Enforce a strict clear the deck policy during all lifting operations. Personnel must exit the vehicle before hoisting begins and remain clear until the load is fully secured. Inspect all rigging components for abrasion, deformation, and hardware wear before use. On this street, a team of workers attempts to manually lift a massive steel panel onto a truck bed. But as they raise it, the oversized load suddenly tilts past its balance point. Never attempt to manually lift or control large, heavy materials that exceed safe human handling limits. Large panels have high centers of gravity and can shift unexpectedly. Once the panel begins to tilt even slightly, the leverage created becomes extremely difficult to counter by hand, putting anyone nearby at risk. Mechanical lifting equipment must be used for heavy structural materials. When a large panel begins to tip, workers should step back immediately. Trying to stabilize a shifting load manually only increases the risk for everyone involved. Along a brick exterior, a worker performs tasks at elevation using a tall tubular frame scaffold. Without proper anchoring, the structure loses lateral stability. Never ever construct a scaffold higher than 4 times its base width without anchoring it to the structure. This violates the 4-to-1 rule. Scaffolds are inherently top-heavy and rely on wall ties to maintain stability against lateral forces. To prevent this, scaffolds must be secured according to anchoring schedules, with ties installed at prescribed vertical and horizontal intervals. Anchors must be fixed into solid structural material and never rely on friction or weight alone. Inside a recycling facility, a worker approaches the chamber of a large hydraulic baler to clear a material blockage, believing the system is temporarily inactive. Never ever access a compaction chamber, shear zone, or press area without personally applying your own lockout tagout device. This is a high-risk, unexpected activation scenario. Hydraulic balers may initiate movement automatically through timers, sensors, or programmed logic, even when no direct operator command is given. Never rely solely on emergency stop buttons or interlocked gates to limit hydraulic motion. Use long-reach tools or hooks to remove obstructions from a safe distance whenever possible. If physical access is unavoidable, all energy sources must be fully isolated and locked beforehand. During a patio renovation, a worker steps off a ladder onto a narrow wooden beam to reposition a roof panel. As he climbs on the beam, his footing becomes unstable. Never ever use a structural beam or rafter as a standing surface. This is a serious working platform misuse. Structural members are designed to carry vertical loads, not to provide lateral stability for foot placement. To prevent this, all elevated work must be performed from a stable, flat working platform. If an extended reach is required, use a mobile scaffold tower or a crawling board, chicken ladder that distributes weight across a wider surface. If a task cannot be performed safely from the ladder, the solution is improved access equipment, not a riskier body position. In a workshop, a worker climbs a ladder to retrieve a heavy rolled rug from a loft. Instead of lowering it safely, he releases it, striking the ladder below. Never throw or release heavy materials while positioned on an unsecured ladder. Sudden movement or impact can disrupt the friction that keeps the ladder stable. Any force applied to the ladder rails or an abrupt change in balance can quickly compromise a previously secure setup. To prevent this, always use a rope, hand line, or mechanical aid to lower bulky items safely. Maintain 3 points of contact on the ladder at all times. If an object is too large or heavy to manage with one hand, a ladder should not be used. At a loading dock, operators use a walkie stacker to load an oversized load into a truck. As the load rises to clear the tailgate, the machine begins to lose stability. This is a stability triangle failure. Walkie stackers have narrow wheelbases and limited tolerance for elevated or oversized loads. Raising a load moves the combined center of gravity closer to the edge of the stability envelope. To prevent this, walkie stackers must never be used beyond their rated capacity or approved load center. Loads should remain low during travel and be raised only when the unit is stationary on level ground. Oversized or wide loads require counterbalance forklifts specifically designed for that application. In a garage workspace, a painter overreaches from the top of an A-frame stepladder, creating a fall hazard. Never, ever allow your belt buckle to pass outside the side rails of a ladder. This is a serious off-center reach error. Stepladders remain stable only when the weight is centered between all 4 feet. Side overreach turns the body into a lever that can tip the ladder. To prevent this, follow the belt buckle rule at all times. If the work cannot be reached comfortably, climb down and reposition the ladder. At a remote maintenance site, a worker swings toward a pipe flange while a colleague stands nearby, but the task does not proceed as intended. A sledgehammer swings with wide force due to its weight and momentum. If it glances off or misses the target, the head can move unpredictably, putting anyone in its path at risk. Always stay outside the full swing zone, which includes the worker's arm plus the hammer length, and use clamps to stabilize workpieces instead of a person. On a busy street, a driver sits on the edge of a reversing 3-wheeled haulier to steer the vehicle. A sharp turn suddenly throws off his balance. The steering bars on these machines function as long lever arms. Sharp steering inputs can cause the handlebars to move quickly across the trailer's front area. Anyone positioned within that sweep path is exposed to sudden handlebar movement and reduced stability due to the speed and reach of the steering mechanism. To prevent this, never sit on the front edge of a trailer where steering components can sweep through. When reversing in confined spaces, it is safer to dismount and guide the vehicle from the side while maintaining full clearance from all moving steering mechanisms. In an excavation area, a worker is inside an unprotected trench. As work continues along the edge, the surrounding soil begins to lose stability. Trench instability is one of the most serious hazards encountered on construction sites. To prevent this, never enter a trench deeper than 1.5 meters unless an approved protective system is in place. Always use trench boxes, shoring systems, or engineered shielding designed to support the surrounding soil. During a manual demolition task, a worker strikes the base of a freestanding wall with a sledgehammer, expecting it to fall in a predictable direction. However, the result is an uncontrolled structural collapse. Never ever undercut or strike the base of a wall to induce collapse manually. This is a structural undermining violation. Masonry walls do not fail directionally like trees. Once the base is compromised, the entire vertical load loses stability and may extend beyond anticipated boundaries. To prevent this, walls must always be dismantled from the top down using controlled methods. When mechanical demolition is required, equipment must be equipped with protective structures, such as falling object protective structures, and operated from a safe distance. Inside a material processing plant, a worker positions himself close to the feed intake of an active industrial pressing system. A routine moment near the press soon becomes hazardous. Never use your hands or body to feed material into an operating machine. In a busy produce yard, a forklift operator notices a tall stack of crates starting to shift. Acting on instinct, he makes an unsafe choice. Never, ever leave the protection of the forklift cab in an attempt to influence or stabilize a moving or unstable load. In a steel fabrication yard, workers pause beneath an overhead crane as a large load travels along its designated path. Unseen by those below, the rigging system begins to fail. Do not stand, walk, or remain beneath a suspended load. This violates the red zone rule. Overhead, lifting creates a high-risk area where equipment malfunction, load shift, or component separation can result in uncontrolled descent. To prevent this, crane operators must follow strict no-fly zone protocols and avoid traveling loads over occupied spaces. Ground personnel must maintain constant situational awareness and clear the area whenever lifting operations are active. Personal protective equipment offers no meaningful protection from overhead materials of this scale. In an unloading zone, an operator attempts to move a forklift down the metal bed of a tilt tray truck, but it doesn't go as planned. Forklifts should not be driven on or off tilt tray trucks unless the angle is minimal and surface traction is adequate. The preferred unloading method is via a dock or ground level ramp. When tilt trays must be used, the truck should be positioned on level ground and the forklift lowered using controlled winching rather than powered driving. At an active construction site, a crew pours a concrete slab supported by temporary wooden shoring. As the load increases, inadequately reinforced supports begin to show signs of structural distress. This scenario represents a falsework system failure. Wet concrete behaves as a live load, weighing approximately 2,400 kilograms per cubic meter. Without sufficient diagonal bracing, vertical supports are unable to resist compressive forces and may shift out of alignment. To prevent this, concrete pours must never proceed without approval of the shoring design by a qualified engineer. Temporary timber supports should be replaced with adjustable steel props or engineered shoring towers for heavier loads. Horizontal ledgers and diagonal bracing must tie all supports together into a rigid, unified framework. On a quiet street, a man attempts to open a sealed 55-gallon steel drum. Assuming the lid is just stuck, he applies heat without verifying the container's contents. Do not apply heat or introduce thermal sources to a closed or unverified drum. This is a high-risk hot work scenario. Containers that appear empty may still contain residues or vapors that respond in unintended ways when exposed to temperature changes. To prevent this, use non-sparking tools and penetrating oil to loosen fittings. Treat all unmarked or sealed drums as requiring formal verification before handling. Containers must be properly cleaned, purged, and tested using approved methods before any heat-producing tools are brought near them. In an industrial yard, a worker stands close to a forklift lifting a large steel ring. As the load rises, the balance characteristics of the machine change. Forklifts depend on a stability triangle formed by wheel placement and center of gravity. When a load is lifted too high, exceeds rated capacity, or is handled improperly, the center of gravity can move outside this stability zone, reducing balance margins. Pedestrian exclusion zones must be strictly enforced around operating forklifts. Ground personnel should remain at least 3 meters away at all times. Operators must follow load ratings carefully and avoid maneuvering with elevated loads. Maintaining distance remains the most effective protective measure for nearby workers. Inside an aluminum foundry, a worker moves beneath an overhead crane carrying stacked ingots. During travel, the load suddenly shifts. Never, ever stand, walk, or work beneath a suspended load. This is the restricted lift zone rule. Even loads that appear stable depend on rigging condition, balance, and surface interaction, all of which may change during movement. Establish and enforce a strict restricted lift zone at all times. Crane operators must avoid positioning loads over personnel, and ground workers must remain outside the vertical travel path of the hook. Use secured containers or properly bundled materials to maintain consistent load behavior. In an industrial facility, a worker attempts to climb a stairwell while carrying equipment in one hand. A slight misplacement of footing affects his balance. Ascending or descending stairs and ladders requires maintaining 3 points of contact at all times. Carrying items by hand reduces grip security and overall balance. Open stairwells and vertical gaps must be treated as elevation hazards and protected accordingly. Tools should be transported using tool belts, hoists, or mechanical lift systems to keep hands free. Facilities must install guardrails, mid-rails, or protective barriers around vertical openings. When working near changes in elevation, fall prevention systems provide an essential additional safeguard. Inside this food processing plant, as a worker reaches toward a running industrial mixer, his loose clothing drifts close to the rotating assembly. Never, ever approach, load, or clean rotating machinery while it is in operation. In a residential driveway, a man descends a tall extension ladder while someone steadies the base on smooth concrete. The ladder angle is too shallow, and as weight shifts, the base begins to slide. At no time should you set up an extension ladder without following the 4-to-1 ratio. This is a significant bus stability risk. When a ladder is placed too flat, the friction at the base is insufficient to counteract the outward force generated during ascent or descent. To prevent this, position the ladder base 1 foot away from the wall for every 4 feet of vertical height, creating the proper 75-degree working angle. On smooth surfaces such as concrete, never rely on a human spotter alone. Use a rubberized ladder mat or secure the base to a fixed anchor point to maintain consistent positioning. In a construction environment, an operator carefully backs a cat skid steer down steep, narrow ramps. As the machine tips onto the incline, its balance begins to change. This situation illustrates a failure to follow the heavy end uphill rule. Skid steers have a short wheelbase, and when the bucket is empty, the engine places more weight toward the rear of the machine. By backing down the ramp, the operator positioned the heaviest portion of the machine on the downhill side, allowing the center of balance to move beyond a stable range. To prevent this, always keep the heaviest end of the machine facing uphill. When the bucket is empty, drive forward down the ramp. Only back down a ramp when carrying a heavy load in the bucket. In addition, never use narrow or portable ramps for heavy equipment. Inside an automotive workshop, a red sedan is raised on a 2-post lift. Improper arm placement creates an uneven load as the vehicle remains elevated. Never assume lift points on a vehicle's frame. If the weight is not evenly distributed between the lift arms, even minor changes in load can cause the vehicle to shift relative to the lift pads. To reduce risk, always raise the vehicle only a short distance off the ground first and perform a controlled stability check. Refer to the manufacturer's lift point diagram for the specific vehicle model. When removing heavy components such as engines or transmissions, use tall jack stands to compensate for changes in weight distribution. In a stone yard, a forklift positions a large slab while a worker stands inside the rack system. As the load shifts, the space around him rapidly closes. Do not position yourself between a moving load and a fixed object. This creates a pinch point with no allowance for safe error. If material shifts, tilts, or loses stability, surrounding structures restrict movement options and significantly reduce available escape pathways. The worker on the ground made a critical judgment error by standing inside the potential movement zone to manually guide the slab. Specialized lifting clamps or mechanical positioning tools, not hands-on guidance, are the only reliable methods for controlling large materials in these environments. In a sand yard, a worker lowers the heavy steel ramp of a low-loader trailer while positioned in its path. As he releases the safety chain, the ramp begins to move under its own weight. Never, ever stand within the travel path of a trailer ramp during release. This is a gravity control risk. Once restraints are removed, ramps move according to weight distribution and mechanical design. Always stand to the side, outside the ramp's movement path. Use controlled release techniques and guide the ramp from a safe position. Never assume a ramp will remain stationary without mechanical restraint. On a canal bank, an excavator retracts its arm while a ground worker stands directly beneath the attached implement. The equipment appears secure, but a mechanical condition develops. No worker should ever position themselves beneath a suspended excavator attachment. If the locking mechanism is not fully engaged or a retaining device is missing, the attachment may separate from the arm without advance indication. Ground personnel must always recognize and respect equipment exclusion zones, which include areas directly beneath and surrounding elevated components. Operators are required to conduct a functional verification, commonly referred to as a bump test. In an active aggregate yard, a worker stands in the travel path of a moving wheel loader. With the bucket raised, the operator's forward view is severely limited. Wheel loaders have inherent forward visibility limitations caused by the bucket and lift arms. When material is carried, the operator's view of the travel path can be obstructed for several meters, creating a visibility zone where ground personnel may not be easily detected from the cab. To prevent this, ground workers must treat equipment travel paths as restricted areas unless clear eye contact has been established with the operator. Operators should keep the bucket as low as practical during travel to improve visibility. If forward visibility is obstructed, the loader should be operated in reverse or guided by a trained spotter. In a demolition area, a worker spots a metal sheet protruding from a brick wall and tries to pull it free. As he applies force, he unknowingly disturbs the structural element. Never, ever manually pull on rebar, metal sheeting, or debris embedded in a standing wall. These materials often serve as internal connections that help distribute weight and maintain structural integrity. Removing them can compromise support while simultaneously applying lateral force to masonry, which is designed primarily to support vertical loads. Inside a semi-trailer at a loading dock, a forklift begins backing toward the exit, assuming the trailer is secured. Without warning, the truck starts to pull forward. Do not rely on assumptions during dock operations. This is a common trailer movement risk. Without a physical restraint system, there is no guaranteed connection between the trailer and the building. Prevent this by enforcing wheel chocking before forklifts enter trailers. Use key control systems or dock restraints that physically limit trailer movement. On a roadside worksite, an operator raises a loader bucket to a high lift height to clear the side of a truck. As the bucket reached its highest position, the material within it shifted. Never, ever raise a loose load to full height without a spill guard or load backrest. This is a serious material retention risk. As loader arms rise, linkage geometry can change the bucket's angle, allowing unsecured material to reposition toward the rear of the bucket. To prevent this, never lift higher than necessary until actively dumping. Inside a tire service facility, a worker handles a large truck tire, treating it as unpressurized. As it drops onto the concrete, the tire reacts unexpectedly. Never release or handle an inflated tire abruptly. Heavy vehicle tires contain substantial volumes of compressed air constrained by internal steel reinforcement. Over time, internal components may be affected by age, environmental exposure, improper inflation, or prior handling. Sudden external forces can transfer stress through the internal structure, increasing the internal pressure response. Always handle inflated tires as energy-managed components rather than passive objects. Lower them gradually using a tire dolly, hoist, or mechanical assist. Prevent tires from contacting hard surfaces abruptly.